Thank you for joining us today for another adventure with IFAS Extension. I don't know about you, but it feels like spring and almost like summer, so maybe we should start looking at some of the things in our landscape. Sometimes we have a green landscape. Maybe that green's not necessarily a monoculture of grass. It might be other weedy type guys. So maybe we need to look at how can we control some of them, should we want to. And then maybe you have brown patches. I know I've seen a few around the neighborhood. So are those brown patches something we should be concerned with? How can we manage those? What are some of the other things that we should be doing in our landscape this time of year? And what can we do with some of these questions that all of us seem to have? And today, I'm very lucky to have joining me two people from the University of Florida's Extension Office that know all about my St. Lucie yard. Hi, Ed, and hi, Kate.
Hi, Anita.
Hello, Anita.
So you're here to tell us all this stuff because you guys are experts, I understand, about my St. Lucie yard. So you have a yard, right? Both of you?
Yep.
Yes, I do, and it's in St. Lucie.
And it's in St. Lucie?
Yes, so it works out really well.
Very good. Okay, so, and you maintain it yourself, or do you have someone?
I maintain it myself.
Okay, how about you, Kate?
I have someone, but I do some of the things myself too.
Okay, well that's
So, a little
sometimes
bit
is
of
the
both.
case. Yeah, we have people that maintain their own, and sometimes they do a little bit, like some little parts and pieces, kind of color additions here and there and stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I know there's a lot of people that have thoughts about different things, and tell me a little bit about my St. Lucie yard.
Well, I don't know if you are aware, but different municipalities up and down the Indian River Lagoon primarily decided to pass an ordinance that they believe would help with possible contamination from fertilizers that are being used in the landscape. Because of the possibility of them running into the waterways and into the lagoon, which was great. But what we realized as experts, we realized that the average homeowner, when this ordinance was passed, didn't really understand or didn't really know what those restrictions were. So that's why we decided that maybe it might be a good idea to create sort of a self-help program for them. To sort of teach them on, proper fertilizer applications, the right fertilizers, and also not only that, but how they irrigate too.
Oh, okay. So the program sounds like it's very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned restrictions. So what are the restrictions that are involved with these ordinances?
Well, what they are, there's a couple of restrictions. One of them being year-round, you are not a homeowner and also a landscape professional, because like you mentioned before, not everybody does their own landscape.
Right.
So we have to teach not only the homeowner but the business folks too that are out there taking care of our landscapes. Fertilizers that don't contain phosphorus. There is an exception though to that, is the only way to determine whether or not you can use that is to get your soil tested. And that will determine whether or not your landscape needs phosphorus. But that's a year-round restriction, so you're not allowed to use that type of fertilizer unless, for year-round.
Unless you can prove
Exactly
that your
right.
soil is
Requires it, deficient.
deficient. Okay.
Yes, deficient.
And how would they? All right, I'm a homeowner. I think that my plants need phosphorus because I've read that plants that like to flower or fruit really like a lot of phosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
So what would I do then? How would I
What you could
determine
do
that?
is you can take a soil sample and you can bring that to the extension office and we will send it up to the university, and or the homeowner can do that. But they can just call us and we'll help them how to prepare the soil sample, and then they can get a reading of how much and if their soil is deficient in that. That's the only way to determine. It's not just someone that says, okay, I think I need that.
Okay, so they have to have an official, and probably the reason is that in case someone was checking up on them, is so...
Yeah, there's not really, the landscape police aren't out there, but it's just teaching them to do the right thing, and that way they have a record of it. And you would like to know whether or not, just determine whether or not
Sure.
you're deficient
Sure.
in that.
And phosphorus apparently is one of them that they are concerned for the lagoon's
Exactly
health,
right.
the water body's health.
Absolutely. And there is another one too during the blackout period. During that restrictive time, during the blackout period, you're not allowed to apply and fertilizers that contain nitrogen either, so nitrogen and phosphorus. But that's
Now,
only
you
during the
mentioned
blackout.
a blackout. When is that?
It's during what we consider our summer months, so from officially from June 1st through the end of September, so September 30th.
Okay. And that's the blackout period that you can't apply nitrogen
and
of course phosphorus.
the phosphorus.
Because you can't apply that anytime unless you've had
Correct.
your soil tested and it says you're deficient.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's an understandable, and that's pretty much all the way up and down the coast.
Yes, and a lot of
of
the
the lagoon.
counties are adopting those practices. So.
Okay, so having the program with My St. Lucie Yard kind of helps people understand some of these changes
Absolutely.
and how to work with their landscape.
Definitely, because often when you read an ordinance, it could be sort of like, what does this really mean? So we just want to break it down, layman's terms. This is what you need to do, and educate the homeowner
Oh.
doing that, and the landscape professional too.
Well, Ed, I know you work with a lot of the professionals yourself.
Yes.
So you do a program, I believe, that trains them about fertilizing and about irrigation and about maintenance, pruning, and everything. So that one's called.
Well, that's our Green Industries Best Management Practices, a program. It's been around for years, and it is a 6-hour training program that will teach the professional landscaper, not only the business landscaper, but his or her employees, municipal employees, golf course employees, about proper practices and procedures that can positively impact water bodies. So we discuss not only fertilization practices, but best management practices for pesticide application, irrigation application, and landscape and pruning practices.
Yeah, I've noticed recently when I've been driving around that I see the guys with the blowers and they're blowing the grass that they've mowed into the road back into the landscape, which is, I know, a practice that you prefer to see, and keeping the grass clippings on the lawn instead of in where they can run off into the waterway and then the lagoon.
Right, those clippings can be, they can have nitrogen in them. Not only that, but they could also cloud up water and water bodies that can prevent sunlight from getting to plants. So yeah, that's a really good practice. That's one of the ones that we emphasize over and over again throughout the 6-hour training.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when you're talking to these professionals, then, because there is this blackout period that Kate mentioned, what types of fertilizers are they allowed to use then if there's a blackout period? Because we know, working with the University of Florida, that the research has been done that grass grows more actively in the summertime, not so much in the winter when it's cooler. So what kinds of fertilizers are you able to suggest to them to use, or to homeowners for that matter?
Well, yeah, obviously you're not, you cannot use any fertilizer that has nitrogen or phosphorus in it during that period between June the 1st and September, the end of September. But still, the turf grass is impacted. I mean, it's still impacted by traffic, by cutting, so it weakens. What we'll go in and recommend is that you'll use a product that'll have no nitrogen in it whatsoever or phosphorus, but it will have potassium, which is that third element, the K on the big three on a fertilizer.
So you'd have like a zero.
A zero?
And then another zero.
Right.
And then you'd have whatever the other number is for
whatever that is. Sometimes it's a 0015, sometimes it's a 0027, but it also will have micronutrients in it which will all help that turf grass to stay strong and prevent it from stressing out during extended periods of, for instance, drought, or even extended periods of too much rain. So it kind of toughens the turf grass up, and it's a nice supplement to add in there during that period when nitrogen cannot be used. So that's what we recommend.
Okay. So if you have like a 0015, 0 being nitrogen, 0 being phosphorus, 15 being potassium.
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned the other micronutrients. What would some of those other ones be?
Well, those would be manganese and iron and sulfur and those elements. Magnesium would be in there, although that's considered a macronutrient, but you would like to see some magnesium in that makeup of fertilizer. So.
Okay. And how would we know how would we know by looking at it? Because the front of the thing has those three numbers. What about the ones you're talking about? How would we know they're in the fertilizer bag?
Well, usually you could flip that bag over and it'll have a list of everything, every component that's in that bag, including the micronutrients. On the front label, you'll see that big N, P, and K. Toss that bag over and you'll see what other elements are in there. The magnesium, manganese, sulfur, iron.
Okay, and that's that basic, what's on the back would also like, in the times when we don't have the blackout period. In other words, it's after September or it's before June. So do you recommend to some of these lawn maintenance people and homeowners when are good times to apply fertilizers that are allowed to have nitrogen? And how much nitrogen can they use or should use?
Well, we do, and it's almost seasonable, Anita. Going out of the blackout period, you get into October and November, and as you indicated, the turf grass, as heavy as it's growing during the hotter months, it stops growing during the cooler months. So we make recommendations to go in with rates of maybe half a pound or a little bit more, maybe 3/4 of a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, so that the plant can take that up at a slower rate. We also look at the different forms of the coating that's on the slow release, so that it will not release it over a longer period of time, because sometimes the plant that's not growing actively can't take up that nutrient, and you're going to lose it into runoff.
I see. So is there a percentage you mentioned of the coating that allows it to be slow released? Is there a percentage of that nitrogen that has to be?
Yes, and that is, again, according to our ordinance that Kate was referring to. At least 50% of a bag of nitrogen, a bag of fertilizer with nitrogen, has to be a slow release to it. Okay? 50% of that has to be insoluble nitrogen, and usually that's either sulfur coated or poly coated urea or some other form of nitrogen.
And again, is that where we turn the bag over and we find that information? Does it say it on the front?
Well,
how do we?
Usually you'll see that, I believe, on the back of that bag. And what you'll do is you'll go down there and it'll say what percentage of the nitrogen is slow release. So let's say you'll have, let's just pick a number, let's say it's 30% nitrogen. On that bag underneath there, it'll say 15% slowly available nitrogen. Well, when you start to see what, you do the calculations, you know that 15% is 50% of 30, so you know that 50% of that nitrogen is slow release.
Okay. All right, that helps. I think that helps understand a little, because it's always confusing a little bit. I mean, it's hard enough trying to figure out how much of this should I put in my lawn, and then how much should I do for other things. Now, if I'm buying, we mentioned that we've got our grass, which is our lawn. We've got fruit trees, maybe. We've got flowers. We've got other ornamentals or shrubs in our landscape. So we're buying a fruit fertilizer, a vegetable fertilizer, a lawn fertilizer, a shrub fertilizer. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Are we supposed to be using 4 different fertilizers at a time? Is there a way? Because I've seen some people and they'll say, well, I've got lawn fertilizer, let me just put that on my shrubs and stuff. So is that acceptable, or is there something that we should be doing?
I think that's entirely up to the individual homeowner. Myself, I would prefer to go out and put down one fertilizer, one product that would take care of my fruit trees and take care of my ornamentals and my turf grass. So, but if the homeowner wants to go ahead and do that, that's entirely up to her or him.
Okay. If you've got palm trees in the landscape, is there a better, I know palm trees have a different fertilizer regime than perhaps your lawn does. They would be in that blackout period, but is there a better fertilizer to suggest for palm trees as opposed to lawn fertilizer or a one-time fertilizer that you would be getting?
Well, yes, and I think what you have to understand is that palms in the landscape are probably the most finicky of all your plants. And
we have lots of them.
And we have lots of them, and they're everywhere. And so if you can keep the health of your palm tree, then you're pretty much going to be keeping the health of your ornamentals and your turf grass.
Wow.
So the formula that the University of Florida's research department has come up with, and this has been over years of trialing, is a formula where you'll have 8% slow release nitrogen, 100% slow release, no phosphorus as per our ordinance, and 12%, 100% slow release potassium, with that fourth element being magnesium available in a soluble form, kieserite, which is magnesium sulfate.
Okay, so 8, 0,
0,
12,
4.
4. Okay, all right, and then you said kieserate was
Yeah.
the magnesium, and it's in a slow release form.
Yeah, well, it's prilled. So the kieserite is a natural ingredient that's mined primarily in Germany.
Oh.
And it's just from thousands and thousands and thousands of years of where that ocean was, the breakdown of the salt. So they pull that up to the surface, they separate it, and they prill it into magnesium sulfate, kind of like Epsom salts. But the difference is that it's available over a longer period of time, and
Because it's slow release.
because it's a slower release, but it will not react with your pH, either if your pH is too high or too low, which magnesium not prilled can, because of high pH that can get tied up in the soil.
Right.
So the kieserite is a magnesium sulfate, naturally mined element that is very important in palm growth, as is the potassium.
Right. Yeah, because you see those deficiencies before usually you see anything else.
Yes.
And that's the higher pH that you're referring to that tends to show you that. I know in the magnesium you see it on the older growth, as well as the potassium you'd see on the older growth too. A lot of your canaries, I see the yellowing on the lower fronds.
And that's a common question that comes into us all the time. And what happens is that excessive amounts of nitrogen in the landscape, let's say for turf, prevents that tree, the palm tree, from utilizing the potassium in that mix. And potassium is probably the single most important element for palm growth. So that's why that formulation where you see less nitrogen than you do potassium for palms is put in that way.
Good, good.
So you can, yeah. I mean, I use an 8-0-12, and when I do fertilize, I'll put it down for my turf, for my ornamentals, for my palms.
So that's your one time.
That's my one time, yeah.
Because you have some palms, so you use that palm fertilizer for all of them.
And that way I don't have all kinds of fertilizer hanging around my garage.
Right. Because it goes bad after a while. If it gets moisture
it becomes
in it.
ineffective. Or yeah, you're right. It could get wet, or the humidity.
Yeah. We don't have that, do we?
No. And the next thing you know, you're getting runoff from those bags of fertilizer.
Yeah.
And so you fertilize maybe twice a year, and you've used up a 50-pound bag on a 8,000, 9,000 square foot yard.
Wow. Well, Kate, you mentioned earlier that part of that My St. Lucie yard talks about irrigation, and tell us a little bit about what you go over with that component.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that if you have an automatic irrigation system, I'm not talking about, hooking a hose up and hand watering, you have an actual irrigation system that you use. By law, you really should have a rain shut-off device.
So when it's raining, that
right.
irrigation shouldn't be going?
Exactly, which you tend to, unfortunately, see a lot. You'll be driving down the road and you'll see, areas being irrigated and there's a storm out. So because possibly they don't have a rain shut-off device, or if they do, maybe it isn't maintained, but it's important to know how to install that, and you should really have it installed by the irrigation clock. And then what will happen is if the landscape has received enough, what's considered enough rainfall, it will automatically turn that system off, and then it won't be going when it doesn't need to be going. You shouldn't have the automatic shut-off, under the roof of the house, under the eaves.
Where it can't get the rain,
where
right?
it can't get the rain. It
Yeah.
sort of defeats the purpose. So it should be in an area where it can receive the rainfall. And it's really important to maintain that too, because you realize there's a little like filter in there that could go bad. So
Like a little disc or something
Yes.
that notices the moisture. And yeah, probably after a while being out in the sun, it dries up or whatever.
especially here in Florida.
Yeah.
So it's just like anything. So probably once a year you should check that out and maybe replace that as well. So that's important to do. And then the other thing that is always the question is, how often should I water?
Yeah, people ask that or they'll say, why is my irrigation coming on again? Like if they live in a community where they don't control it, they want to know why is my water being irrigated all the time? Is it costing me money and all of those
Right.
things? So yeah, how often should you be watering?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question. Obviously, every landscape is different. You have to you have to get to know your landscape before you just determine, what to do. How much drainage does it have?
Oh.
Do you have wet areas? Do you have higher dry areas? But just generically, rule of thumb, you should consider, 1/2 inch to about 3/4 of an inch per irrigation application. But again, every landscape is different, but that's kind of the rule of thumb that we go by. And then
Do we water more in the summer than the winter?
right.
or-
So
Okay.
obviously during our cooler periods, the winter months, 7 to 10 days, give or take, because the grass and things aren't growing.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to irrigate something that's not growing. It's sort of the dormant time of year. And then when it's warmer out and we haven't had rain, maybe 3 to 5 days. Every 3 to 5 days you should irrigate.
And I guess it depends, like you said, on the soil and how well it drains. Because
Absolutely.
there's some people that have like that really white sandy soils
Absolutely.
that drain so fast. You put your water and you're like, where'd it go?
Right.
Yeah. And then they have some that hold the water, especially areas, the communities. I've noticed where I live, a lot of the retention areas, the soil's been put up, that made those retention areas that were required, and then that soil's used around the home, and then sometimes that soil is very heavy and holds
Yeah.
the moisture.
Right. So everywhere's different. So, but they're just that's you just got to keep that as like a guideline. What I mentioned, but you just have to know your landscape. There's no written rule of how often you should do it, but those are just guidelines that we give to the homeowners.
Okay. Well, is there a way to check your irrigation to know how much? You mentioned 1/2 and to 3/4 of an inch that you should have.
You can, and you should obviously. There's a sort of you can have a professional come in and help you calibrate it, but if you wanted to just do it yourself, if you're like Ed and you maintain your own landscape, you could get something like I always refer to like flat-sided can, like a tuna can. Sporadically put those around your landscape, run your irrigation, and then probably for around like 30 minutes or so, and then you collect the water and then divide it by how many.
So add them all up and then divide by that number
Yeah.
of like 7 cans or something, and
Right.
come up with the amount that you have, and
Yeah.
then you know how long to run that
Right.
one zone.
Exactly.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bearing in mind again the 1/2 an inch to 3/4 of an inch.
So then you could collect
application.
it down, so it may not take 30 minutes, or it may take more than that.
Sure,
Yeah.
and that will determine how fast or slow your landscape drains.
I see.
So,
That's a good point.
yeah, so it takes time. It's not just something you can,
Yeah.
do quickly, and just be patient and get to know your sunshade patterns and how your landscape is, just like anything. So.
Well, Ed, when we're fertilizing, because I'm still on the fertilizing thing, what are some of the techniques? I've seen people with gloves and they just kind of scatter it around.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've seen people with like official equipment, spreaders, and they go along and they spread. So, what are some of the things that we should or shouldn't do?
Well, I think what you really need to do is to be cognizant of when you're applying fertilizer that it's not getting on impervious surfaces, driveways, or on the roadway. That's really important.
Kind of like the grass clipping thing. Keep your fertilizer
and
on.
if it is, you either blow it back up on the lawn or sweep it up. So that's really important. And also when you're putting the fertilizer into your fertilizer spreader, again, you probably want to do that on an impervious surface, but have something to catch that fertilizer in case you spill it. Because if you do that on a turf grass and you spill too much,
You got a
of
brown
fertilizer,
spot.
then you got one of those brown spots that you got to go out there and figure out, well, why
Why
is
is
that
it brown?
happening?
Yeah.
Why is it brown? So that's really important. And on bags of fertilizer, on most good bags of fertilizer, they're going to have what you want to set your fertilizer spreader to according to that bag, that chart.
Okay.
So follow that as well. If anything, kind of underneath that whatever that the setting is, set it for a little bit less, and then when you're fertilizer, you're going to go at 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And that's what that setting will do for you.
Okay, so it
That
does it
setting
automatically
will
for you.
say, okay,
That's good.
you're in the ballpark now. So, and then when you're fertilizing, you're going to want to go north and south, and then
Okay, like when you're mowing the lawn, which I found out.
Yes.
That you go one way and then you come back and go the other way. So you
Yes.
get better coverage that way, right?
you do have better coverage that
Okay.
way, and you'll have a nice coverage, and hopefully you'll get everything, where you want that. So.
And then you want to water it in?
Well, you do. One last thing about when you're applying is that when you get to the end of a row, you want to close your spreader. Because what
So-
happens when you turn around, that fertilizer just has a tendency to drop straight down, so you can get little burnt patches there.
burns, okay.
So make sure as you're coming to the end, you close that, make your turn, and when you make that turn, maybe I would say twice the width of your hopper or your spreader, so that when you're making, you just don't come straight back down, that you may be over 2 or 3 feet and then come back up.
Okay.
All right, and turn your little spreader back on, and away you go.
And irrigate afterwards or water it
Well,
in?
you do. You want to irrigate in, but not all that much, maybe 1/4 of an inch. Get that fertilizer settled down there in the roots, get it to start to do what it's supposed to do. If it stays on the surface and you don't irrigate it in, there's a chance that you'll lose that fertilizer to a concept called volatilization, which is simply a reaction of the nitrogen with,
going up
with
into
heat and air.
yeah,
Yes.
I see. So you want to get it down below. That's a good point. Oh, okay.
So you get it nestled in there, and the other thing is when you're fertilizing is to be really aware of the weather pattern. If you see that there's an imminent storm coming on, obviously you don't want to.
Not a good time to do it.
Not a good time to do that.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you both
You're
for
welcome.
helping us understand more about it, and I can definitely see why you're experts because you seem to know everything. So that's very good, and thank you all for joining us today, and we'll be back next time with another adventure with Extension.